Good morning, everyone. Um, Thanks to Alan and the organisers for the invitation. Before I begin, I'd like to reiterate the acknowledgement of country and pay my respects to the Gadigal people, their elders past and present. So Alan said he doesn't know very much about ICSM, so if we move to the next slide, I'll talk briefly about the organisation ICSM, which is Intergovernmental Committee on Surveying and Mapping, and in the Australian governments, being the states, territories and the Commonwealth, we have two collaborative government organisations. One is the one that I'm representing, ICSM. The other one, Safar's already mentioned, which is ANZLIC, the Spatial Information Council, and we work closely together to do a range of activities that relate to collaboration across jurisdictions. One of the things dear to the heart of everyone here is standards and ensuring that we get the best value for Australian governments out of the spatial data that we manage. So jointly, that's what we do. And if we just have a look at on the slide, what you'll see is the members of ICSM and where they come from in terms of their jurisdictions. Just to give an understanding of the history of this organisation, it began under a different name after the Second World War. The Australian government recognised that it needed consistent mapping information across the country, and it put together a survey mapping council to begin the work of standardising and coordinating Australian mapping. And in around the late 1980s, ANZLIC was formed at the request of the Prime Minister, and then the Australian Survey Mapping Council got relabelled to the Intergovernmental Committee on Surveying and Mapping. So if we just move to the next slide, we can have a look at, I've already mentioned briefly the role, but predominantly what you can see is that a large part of our work is implementing appropriate standards and protocols for sharing of information across governments. We do incorporate New Zealand, and in terms of many of these standards, we work closely together with them. However, Australia and New Zealand often implement their own versions of those standards based on the local environments and the legislation within the different jurisdictions. So in addition to our work around standards, we're about collaboration, creating best practice, and ensuring that we deliver value. Our key focus, as you can see from the ANZLIC strategic plan, is about delivering against the UN-GGIM Foundation fundamental spatial data themes. Next slide, please. So I'll start the journey of what we do into standards with a success story. So, no worries. I'll just wait till you tell me. The day's finding always to challenge him, Margie. So we're back. So as I was about to start, and I will acknowledge that a former chair of ICSM's here, Simon Costello, and I think he's talking next, and he would have been involved in this work more closely than I have been. One of the great success stories of ICSM is a standard called JODIC-ML. JODIC-ML started in Australia with a group of esteemed colleagues that I know well, Matthew Higgins, Gemma Pico, Robert Sarab, Graham Billick, Gary Johnson, for those that know the Australian geodesy scene, that they were the authors of a paper back in about 2003-4 that brought the concept of e-geodesy to life. And then through a previous label, but it was an ICSM committee, brought that to life to create the model. It was exercised into a GML application schema, and 2015, that group took it to a number of organisations, which I can't remember all of their acronyms, but when I see things like NASA in there, I know they're fairly important, to see that the standard was going to be suitable for use across the broader GNSS community, Global Navigation Satellite System community. It was adopted, and then a series of improvements were made to it by Geoscience Australia and Frontier SI through the work of Ivana and Nick Brown and a few others. And that is now becoming an adopted standard for the managing of data in continuously operating reference stations and in the transmission of satellite data between phones and other mobile devices. So that's an amazing success story that commenced with the work of ICSM. So the next part of my presentation will take you through the various works relating to standards of the various groups that we have. So I've just talked about the geodesy group. So our standards are many and varied, and in this particular example, this particular standard relates to our mapping datum. The geodesy working group are the driver of that. In about 2000, we converted Australia's various mapping datums to what we called the Geospatial Datum of Australia 1994. So it was using the 1994 implementation of the International Terrestrial Reference Frame. And then a few years later, so 2018, we then implemented an improved version being the Geocentric Datum of Australia 2020. And so this group is at the heart of setting up these datums, understanding them, and then implementing them through the various jurisdictional organisations. Currently, their work is looking at our vertical height datum. So we've had the Australian height datum in place since 1971, and it's been based on a series of tide gauges around the country. And the challenge is linking the tidal gauge data to that captured by global navigation systems. And so they're now putting together, or the system is actually in place. It's the Australian Vertical Working Surface. And so the work is now to ensure that we can link the two height datums and start communicating the benefits of the new surface to our users. So that's just another example of the standards work that our team are involved in. So because we deal with those foundational geospatial themes, so we'll go through each of those that we work within. So cadastre is another one of our working groups, and the cadastre working groups put together various standards. Australia has been over the last 10 years digitising all of its cadastral data. And so we need standards for that data when it's put together into digital cadastres. And so this particular standard, released about 2 years ago, is for the accuracy of those spatial cadastres and what we expect in the various areas. So in this particular standard, we talk about levels of accuracy of individual nodes, and we have various accuracies at the CBD level, in the urban environments, then in the peri-urban environments out to the remote rural environments, including the marine environments where the accuracies are at a much greater scale than you would find in inner suburban areas. In addition to that, next slide. What we're finding is that in the cadastral realm, predominantly a lot of our work over the last 20 years has been focused in the 2D environment. As you can see, if you just are in the room here and you have a look outside the window, it's very difficult to find any cadaster that's sitting in the 2D realm, because most of what we see is elevated. It's either underground or above. We have to start managing our cadastral data in the 3D environment. And so ICSM commenced a project to create a 3D cadastral survey data model, predominantly for the exchanging of cadastral information between the private sector operators who perform the surveys and the government who bring all the cadastral data together into the aggregated digital cadasters. And so working with, we'll go to the next slide, working with a group of consultants, including people like Rob Atkinson and Nicholas Carr and many others, this particular 3D data model, the conceptual model, was put together through a project operated from a project management perspective, being New Zealand, and then involvement of various of the Australian states. The aim is to ensure that the data can be exchanged in a way that's suitable for the future. And so it's going to be a JSON format moving forward, whereas in the past it was an XML that was used for capturing digital survey data. If we just move to the next slide, we can see the three phases of the project that has happened at the moment. So it's been the creation of the conceptual model, moving to implementing that and ensuring that the software providers that we're hoping to adopt this are online and willing to take this on, and then moving from the next phase, which is to make the 3D JSON files, or formats. So the work of the team is still occurring. It's progressing to the point where we hope that implementation of these will commence maybe next year, with, we believe, Western Australia taking the lead in converting their data into this new model. We know that this is something that many other countries are interested in, because we did an extensive search prior to commencing this, and there was no one at this point in the world that had actually created the ability to have cadastral data in a 3D model. So we're hoping that this may change some of the processes for other countries as well, and support them. If we move to the next slide, we're changing track from our cadastre stream into an area where everybody pretty much on a daily basis interacts with spatial data, and they don't even understand or realise they have street addressing and the place naming that sits underneath it. So Australia's had a rural and urban street addressing ISO standard in place since 2011. It's now at the point where that standard's becoming aged and dated, and it needs to be reviewed. And so the street addressing as well as the place names working group are working together to modernise this particular standard to ensure that it is suitable for our modern complex environments. So when this standard was originally written, it was great for the traditional 2D subdivision where you had a single dwelling on a piece of land and you gave it an address. That's not how addressing is occurring, where you have multiple dwellings on a single parcel and you need to find a way to address them, or you have the high-rise element that I spoke of earlier, and a range of other complexities in addressing and place naming. We'll just move to the next one. One of those complexities is that Australia is adopting more traditional owner language as part of place naming and street addressing, and therefore we need a revised set of principles around the consistent place naming throughout the Australian community, and in addition the Maori community in New Zealand. And so this particular group is in the process of refining these principles and working closely to ensure that they're aligned to any of the UN initiatives, being the Decade of Indigenous Language, while they're refining these particular standards. We'll move to the next slide. So there's been a couple of mentions of utilisation of LiDAR. And Australia and New Zealand are certainly utilising LiDAR to a much greater degree for a whole range of uses, and therefore a challenge for many of our agencies is the procurement of that particular data set. And so 10 years ago, a LiDAR standard was created to make it easier for the provider community to work closely with governments to understand what we need and the specifications. And so a large amount of work over the last couple of years has been done to refine this particular standard as the use of LiDAR and the capabilities have increased. So once again, another standard that has been in place that is needed to be refined as technology has improved and usability has become more significant. We have a metadata and standards working group, and I don't think I need to sell this to many of those in the room. It's an important aspect of the work that we do. Safar summed it up pretty well in that, you know, it's trying to understand all the different environments and bringing them all together so that they all operate to deliver our spatial data out to the community. And so you can see that metadata is embedded through an entire environment, as you can see with the Western Australian example that I've used here. And Safar also mentioned the metadata light tool that is managed by this particular group within the ICSM ANZLIC family. So an important group that supports all of our jurisdictions in understanding metadata, understanding standards, and ensuring that our particular agencies can implement them appropriately. As you can imagine, not all of our jurisdictions have significant expertise in metadata and standards, and so we rely on that national collaboration to ensure that we do that sort of work. Next slide, please. So most of what I've talked about up until now has really been around the land side, but as many of you would know, Australia is surrounded by ocean, and our footprint in terms of what we manage from a sea rescue is around about 10% of the surface of the earth, so it's a large area. And so we have these marine working groups that look at various aspects and the standards that are involved in managing our marine environment. One of those is the Oz Hydroid group, which when you have a marine environment and you integrate it, or you have the intertidal zone, it means you've got positioning for the land and positioning systems in the ocean, and you've got to have a group that brings those two together, and that's what the Oz Hydroid group do. So they link the charting datums and the mapping system so that they're appropriate in the marine environment. With coastlines, you have tides, and so you need to have standards around the capture and storage of tidal data for managing that information. And we have the S100 working group, which is an international hydrographic standard, which is around metadata and information relating to infrastructure around ports. I put the diagram here because the importance of this sort of work is just one aspect that I've picked out here is that the depth that you can get ships in terms of the distance between the ocean floor and the keel makes a significant difference to the amount of imports and exports you can bring in. And one case study that we had, it was just one shipping port in Australia, a 0.5 increase in that difference, which allowed bigger ships with more capacity in, meant increase in exports of over 200 million a year just in one port. So this is important work for us to ensure that port management understand where the ocean floor is, where their ships are, and the utilisation of sensors such as positioning systems and ensuring that they link through metadata and standards. So an important aspect of the work we do. There are other things that we do. So this is my final slide, if we can just move to that one. So in addition to doing the work around the standards, we also get involved with some of these types of studies, which is demonstrating the value of geospatial systems, technology data to the overall community. And this particular study, which ICSM is a proud sponsor of, was released last week. And what it demonstrates is that over the next 10 years, the benefit of geospatial information to the community could be up to nearly $700 billion to the Australian economy. Now, what does that mean for us as spatial professionals? Well, one of the challenges we're faced at the moment is trying to attract people to our sector to work and have the capability for ensuring that people can use this. And so having these types of studies enable us to go to government and demonstrate the benefit of what we do and get them to invest in education and providing programs to bring more people into our profession. So it's an amazing study, great work by the Geospatial Council of Australia, and ICSM is a proud sponsor. And with that, thanks once again for inviting us to this event. We've been happy to be a sponsor and open to any questions.
Thanks very much, Craig. Thank you. Yeah, I did ask the question. What you did, really quite a varied program. I thought that was fantastic. Did anybody get any questions for Craig? Yeah, Jan.
Thank you very much. I was wondering regarding the last slide, it was mentioning that the spatial usage as such, but do you also have a subdivision of that describing how much the use of the standard will impact that, about the budget or those figures? Thank you.
That's a good question. I'm not sure that I know the answer, and I'm not sure if it's actually in the study, but I can have a look at it. But the study's online, so I encourage you to go and have a read of it, and you might find the answer.
Yep.
And I have a question about the field cadastral model. It looks very impressive what you're planning to do. And I know in your presentation that you have a lot of JSON kind of files. So do you want to have everything organized in a JSON file?
JSON is really a transfer format, as I understand it, and I'm not the expert. Nicholas is around somewhere who is involved. Really, for us, it's about getting data in and out of government. So the surveying is done by the private sector. We need it digitally. PDFs is useless to us. So it's about ensuring that we have a digital format that is future ready and that we can ensure that any software provider can implement and that we can then accept it and use. And the challenge in the past has been that the XMLs in land, while they've been useful, they've had limitations. And so, yeah.
Because the point about the model is one where the model is going to be organized in take some files and then
yes, so the model that I'm not an expert in this area, but as I understand it, the model has been created utilising as many of the LADM components as it could. But because Australia has a very complex and advanced cadastre, there are things that LADM doesn't cater for. And so when we created the model, we added those particular things in. So it's a hybrid at the moment of LADM plus what we need.
Yeah. And is it supposed to be one model for our state? Or, for example, Queensland is going to maintain?
Yeah, so my understanding is that each of the jurisdictions will have their own implementation of it. What the team has done is that they've put together these national vocabularies so that where we have the same thing but with different names, which often happens, at least those things can be recognised by the model. But each jurisdiction will have to implement it their own way. But we're hoping the key is that by all using that basic model, that it means when you start transferring it around, putting it into national data sets, at least we can all talk together. Yeah.
Okay, right. Thanks very much, Craig, for your
No
talk.
worries.
Thank you.